We got Marty Leap standing by, of course, from Penn State rivals. Good to see you, Marty. How you doing tonight? Oh, we don't have your audio.
My bad.
Now we got your audio.
The mute button remains undefeated. But no, excited to be here. Should be a fun topic to talk about. And yeah, for as heartbreaking of an end of the season it was for Penn State, ever since that Mitch Jeter field goal went through the uprights, literally everything that can go right for this program since then has. So, I mean, you said it yourself, Matt. You look ahead to 2025, and they're all in. They're all in a quest to win a national championship, and yeah, it's an exciting time in Happy Valley.
Marty, the college football calendar does not stop, especially these days. So people, the national championship's over, and 3 minutes later, people are like, "Yeah, that's fine. Ohio State did it, great. Okay, 2025, let's go." That's just how people think in this news cycle these days. But I'm going to take us back to 2024 and what Penn State accomplished and where they came oh so close. And Matt and I will certainly ping pong back and forth in regards to hitting you up on Jim Knowles. But I'm going to start here. I went through my Big Ten power rankings, posted those the other day. I'm also doing a conference rankings that Matt will love. I posted the ACC and the Big 12, and we go through every result, all the non-conference games, and then we add it all up and truly present a clear picture. We do seedings, differentials, the whole deal. Okay, my point with Penn State is I'm looking at Penn State and I'm going, did Penn State have a typical Penn State year? It was just masked by a different format and so forth, okay? Or did they not? Well, the pros of on the Penn State side is 11-1s, better than what they've done during James Franklin's tenure in the past. For succeeding in the playoff, playing two excellent football games, getting past those games, getting to a Notre Dame matchup where they went right down to the wire. There's a number of factors where you could be pro Penn State and say this was a breakthrough season. On the other hand, you could say, well, most Penn State teams would beat SMU and Boise State and arrive at the Notre Dame game, and that's one where they didn't break through and win the game. They also didn't play Michigan or whomever you want to slot in as that elite Oregon for that aided the 11-1 finish and getting to the Big Ten championship game, which of course would not have happened had Ohio State taking care of business on the final weekend. So breakthrough season for Penn State, or maybe just a different version of the past?
I think it was a breakthrough season, and I think I say that as much as because of what is happening off the field now. I mean, obviously, you look at this program, there is alignment from top to bottom within the university, within the football program, with Pat Kraft, with President Benependi that was not there before this athletic director, before this President Benependi took over 2 years ago. So a lot of some of the roadblocks in terms of, as we just saw with the Jim Knowles hire, in terms of assistant coaching salary, in terms of being able to get the boosters and the big money donations in that you need to keep guys around, like we saw with Drew Aller, Nick Singleton, and Katron Allen, et cetera, et cetera. Those things weren't there in the past, and they are now. And I think you can tie some of that to, hey, we made the playoff. We were literally one play away from going to the national championship game. We're that close. That makes that easier to sell through James Franklin and Pat Kraft to boosters, donors, et cetera. But regardless of what has ultimately sprung it, there is a complete buy-in, alignment, financial commitment that has not been there before. So the fact that is there now, that to me makes this a breakthrough season, because I think moving forward, that just increases your odds of being able to compete at this level. If you're Penn State, increases your odds of being able to get back to the semifinals and beyond, that it's not going to be 8 years between trips to Indy. So I do say breakthrough season, but again, I say that for having as much to do with what has happened off the field and behind the scenes with the football program and with the university and with the athletic department over the course of the past few months as I do anything else.
Marty, my question for you, or at least my first question, is would we be sitting here with Jim Knowles as defensive coordinator if Penn State had not gotten to the semis? Let's say Penn State beats SMU but loses to Boise State. You think there's still buy-in from Jim Knowles, or do you think it doesn't happen? How much do you think that winning 2 playoff games really did convince Knowles and create the culture, the environment conducive to making this big splash in the coaching world?
I mean, I'm sure it didn't hurt. I think it probably happens regardless. I mean, it's, obviously nothing we need to get into tonight because it's not necessarily Penn State centric, but a lot of the reporting, things that have come out, it looks like Knowles was looking for a way out of Columbus due to some, just disagreements on the staff there regardless. And I know he'd interviewed at Penn State in the past, had a long-standing relationship with James Franklin. The kind of program, the culture, that sort of thing that James Franklin's cultivated played a large role in Knowles being interested in and being attracted to Penn State. So I think it probably happens regardless. But that said, again, James is able to go to the boosters, to the donors, whoever it may be, Pat Kraft, and say, look, we were literally one play away from playing for the national championship. So, I think those things all are kind of intertwined because, part of the reason Jim Knowles wants to come to Penn State is because what's back on this defense, and without the buy-in to have the NIL money available, I don't think the defense is attractive because denied Dennis Sutton, Zane Durant, and Key Wheatley are probably getting ready for the NFL draft instead of getting ready for their senior years at Penn State. So I definitely think there's some correlation there. But I think, in your scenario where, let's say, they still beat SMU but then lose the Fiesta Bowl, I don't think that prevents it from happening. But it certainly doesn't hurt when, again, you can sit there and say, hey, we were this close to finally reaching the national championship game. And, hey, who knows? Anything. It's one game. It would have been one game. Anything could have happened. But, yeah, I think he would have been here regardless with everything that shook out, but that certainly didn't hurt.
We've got Marty Leap on the line from Penn State Rivals, breaking down Jim Knowles leaving Ohio State, going to Penn State, of course. Probably the highest paid defensive coordinator in the country. I think that already was the case in Columbus, and now it's even more so the case. The numbers that I saw was that with bonuses, he was pushing $3 million at Ohio State, and then I saw 3 years, $9.3 million at Penn State.
Mm-hmm.
So $3.1 million at Penn State. Also a Philadelphia native. How much money obviously is a huge factor. Also ties to the state. Where do you stand on those two being factors in all of this?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think those are factors. I read earlier today that his base salary is going to make him the highest paid coordinator in the history of college football. That's pretty hard to say no to. I mean, I have no doubts if it was solely a money thing, though, he'd still be in Columbus because whatever Penn State or Oklahoma or anyone else was going to offer, Ohio State was going to match it. Mark, you mentioned being from Pennsylvania, the Philadelphia ties. I'm sure that doesn't hurt. I know he has a lot of family who still lives in the Philadelphia, New Jersey area, so it doesn't hurt to be closer. But again, I think a lot of it is just the program Penn State that James Franklin has built. It is a program that coaches are, it's attractive to other coaches. Look how many guys have gone on to either leave Penn State to become a head coach or take a coordinator spot somewhere from a position coach at Penn State and work their way to being a head coach. Ricky Ronnie, Charles Huff, Joe Moorhead, Brent Pry, Anthony Poindexter. Seems like whenever the Virginia job opens up again, he's going to get it. There's a lot of pros to working for James Franklin, and I think that helped as well. I definitely think it was a combination of all the things. But again, like you said, Mark, whenever you get to come back home to your home state and be the highest paid coordinator in the history of college football in the process, that's pretty lucrative for just about anybody.
Marty, in terms of following the Jim Knowles story over the past week or so, how close was it between Penn State and Oklahoma? How much of a angle did the Sooners have on this? Was it always Penn State in the lead, or was this did this take some swerves or some late plot twists? What's your read on how this all played out?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously there were a lot of people in Oklahoma circles who had thought for a few weeks that this was going to be a done deal, that he was going to leave Ohio State and go to Oklahoma. And, personally, I never thought, not saying I never thought that was on the table because I'm sure it was discussed. I know he talked to Oklahoma a lot. It never made a lot of sense to me, though, because if part of the reason why you're leaving Ohio State is you're clashing with Ryan Day, you're clashing with Larry Johnson, there's some debate on how Did Jim Knowles really have full control of his defense? So if that's your main sticking point, why would you go work for Brent Venables first and foremost, where you know Venables is going to run his stuff? And secondly, yeah, I'm if I was a betting man, I would bet money that next year at this time, Brent Venables isn't even Oklahoma's coach. He's already on the hot seat. Their schedule is miserable. I do wonder how much of that was, obviously he has ties to Oklahoma from his time at Oklahoma State, excuse me. His fiance is from Oklahoma, of people kind of connecting the dots and the fact that he was talking to the Sooners. From our end at Happy Valley Insider, it was probably Thursday afternoon, Thursday evening when we really started to hear, hey, this is heating up. He wants to be at Penn State. Penn State obviously wants him. The original train of thought was we wouldn't hear anything till Sunday because he still wanted to be there for the championship celebration with his players, which I totally understand and don't fault him for at all. Obviously, that didn't happen. Again, there's conflicting reports on to whether or not he chose not to go, if Ryan Day didn't allow him there, whatever it was. But Thursday afternoon, Thursday evening, we really started to hear there was a real possibility of this. It rolled over into Friday, and that's when you started seeing reports of Ohio State countering, of Oklahoma throwing silly money around. And, it was like late Saturday, early Sunday morning that we definitely had confirmation on our site. It was going to happen. Jim Knowles had taken the job. It was going to be him. So yeah, I think based off of, what we were told by sources, the reporting we did, and just kind of reading the room on it, I got the vibe that when he made up his mind, he didn't want to be in Columbus anymore. And then Tom Allen left Penn State. That's where he wanted to be, because it wasn't, when Tom Allen first left, Jim Knowles is one of the first name people were going to mention no matter what. And obviously, I'm sure Matt D'Anton Lynn came up too. And there was, I do wonder, I know James Franklin made a big push for D'Anton Lynn that fell through. And then he kind of really reset the board and kind of waited it out till after the national championship game. And that's when the Knowles and Penn State sides really started to talk. So I think once it got on the other side of the national championship game, Penn State didn't have a defensive coordinator yet. Knowles' mind seemed like it was pretty made up that his time in Columbus had run its course. I get the vibe Penn State's the place he always wanted to be, and it was just a matter of making things work. I don't even necessarily think so much it was financially as much as it was him probably wanting to get those reassurances that, some of the problems he was having in Ohio State weren't going to happen at Penn State. And in addition to that, there was a story on Yahoo Sports, I believe by Dellinger, either yesterday or the day before, about how Anthony Poindexter, Penn State safety coach, who was in the running to be promoted to defense coordinator. A lot of people thought once D'Anton Lynn didn't happen, it was going to be just promote Dex. And James Franklin pulled Dex aside, had a conversation with him about Jim Knowles, and his response was literally like, holy crap, we can actually get Jim. And Anthony Poindexter leaves this meeting with James Franklin, pulls out his phone, calls Jim Knowles, and starts selling to Jim Knowles why he should take the Penn State job. So I think those connections helped as well. But yeah, I definitely think there was some real flirtation with Oklahoma. Ohio State was always going to make a big push to keep him. But I think once it got to about middle of the week or so, back end of the week, it was clear Jim Knowles wanted to be at Penn State. Penn State wanted Jim Knowles, and it was just a matter of making it work, and they were able to make it work.
So, Marty, I'm blanking on who was the defensive coordinator before Manny Diaz?
Brent Pry.
Oh, yeah. Duh. Yeah. I knew he became a head coach. Yeah. Brent Pry, Manny Diaz, Tom Allen. There's a certain thought that would be, okay, they have gotten to a recruiting level on that side of the football that as long as they get a capable defensive coordinator, they're going to be a top 5 or 10 defense in the nation, maybe even better than that. But at the same time, when you're that close to the top, then, getting the best or arguably the best versus a top 10 defensive coordinator could be just enough to push you to the top. Did you see any differences between going from Pry to Diaz to Allen, and then what you know about Jim Knowles and the way he sets things up? Any type of difference or boost there?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, from Pry to Manny to Tom Allen, no knock on any of them, because Brent Pry was in Penn State for a long time. He'd been with James Franklin since Vanderbilt, did a very good job, and Tom Allen had a good year this year. I think Manny Diaz was the best of the three. I think the way, I mean, everybody knows Manny Diaz defense, right? You're going to blitz, you're going to attack, you're going to give up a 50-yard play, but then the next 3 plays, you're going to give up -5, and it's all going to work out. And that scheme, that mentality, it fit Penn State, it fit the defense, it fit what they had. I thought he was the most successful of the 3 personally. And I think Knowles is more in the mold of Manny Diaz than the other 2. Now, he doesn't blitz nearly as much as Manny, but few people do. But like you said, Mark, you have the talent that, unless they've got like one of the 3 of us coaching this defense, you should be a top 5 to 10 unit every year. And I saw some people say that, some Penn State fans say, hey, couldn't this money maybe be better spent elsewhere? And I get that. But like you said, Mark, when you're that close to getting over the top, to reaching that pinnacle like they were this year, having the guy who is arguably the best defensive coordinator in college football could be what puts you over the top. I also think if you're Penn State, the fact that Jim Knowles is not at Ohio State anymore is just as much of a boost to you as it is that he's now at Penn State. So I think that's all factored in here. As for what the defense is going to look like, I mean, and you mentioned, having that good of a coordinator, the difference that can make. I do think it can pay off because you have Knowles, who is so incredibly creative with disguising pressures and his ability to get pressure with 4 guys, and the way he uses safeties, especially because Penn State is, even with losing Jalen Reed and KJ Winston to the NFL draft, is still extremely deep at safety, extremely talented. I think these are all things that are where Knowles and Penn State's going to be a just natural mesh together. And, I will never undervalue what a coach can bring to a table who has coached in, called plays in, and won championship games. So I think that experience of Jim Knowles in the national championship, when Texas is driving with 4 minutes to go to tie the game and your defense comes up with a scoop and score to ice it, those types of situations, I think those can never be overstated how important that is for a coach to have. So I think adding that is also very, very important for Penn State. And that's something that, no knock on Tom Allen or Manny Diaz or Brent Pry, none of them ever had that. None of them were ever in that position in their coaching careers where, hey, this is it. Like I said, 4 minutes to go in the semifinals, you're up by 7. Texas is inside the 20. What are we going to do? We're in the national championship game. Notre Dame just drove the ball right down our throats on the opening drive. How am I going to adjust? I think having that experience is also extremely important on a team that, again, you're looking at 2025 is you're going to see them get some conversation for preseason number 1. Expectations are going to be sky high. So I think having that experience of Jim Knowles, I apologize for my dog barking in the background, yelling at the cat, but having that experience of Jim Knowles, I think, is also very important.
Marty, we saw the Rose Bowl. We saw Jim Knowles' Ohio State defense come down on Oregon, and it was a second bite at the apple. It was a rematch. It wasn't the first time, but nevertheless, Penn State fans have to be really excited seeing what Ohio State did to that Oregon offense in the first half of the Granddaddy, and you contrast that to what we saw in the Big Ten championship game in Indianapolis. What do you think's the defining difference for Jim Knowles in terms of being able to go up against and defuse the Oregon offense in light of Tom Allen's inability to find answers in Indianapolis?
Yeah, I mean, if Penn State would have played even average defense, they would have won the Big Ten championship this year. Their offense marched up and down the field on Oregon all night long. Defense could never get a stop. I think a big difference, again, I think against an Oregon offense that, just going off of this year with Dylan Gabriel, was so timing and tempo based. Jim Knowles' ability to disguise what he was doing against an offense that runs so much on timing and being in rhythm. If you can disguise what you're doing on defense, that's the best way to break an offense like that up, because you never let your quarterback get into rhythm. You never let that quarterback get into a tempo. And that's what we saw in the Rose Bowl. And before you could blink, it was 34-0 by the time Oregon had finally scored. So, yeah, I think that was a big difference. One thing, too, I with Knowles that I think is something that's kind of underrated, not going to get talked about a lot outside of Penn State circles. There were a lot of communication issues this year with the defense. Everyone remembers, I'm sure, that first half against Bowling Green when Bowling Green is just marching up and down the field on Penn State. Well, at halftime, Tom Allen gets moved to the box, spends the rest of the year coaching from the box, while former All-American linebacker Dan Connor, who's now the linebackers coach, is the one calling the plays because there was a communication issue of some sort between Allen and the players. So Connor steps in to clean that up, but you now have this sequence where Allen calls the play to Dan Connor, who then calls it to Kobe King or Dominic DeLuca, who then has to give the call on the field, and that takes time. And against Oregon, to go back to using them as a specific example, Oregon's tempo gave them a lot of problems. And whenever you've got a defense that's taking that long to get a call in or having communication issues like that, tempo is going to give you problems. Against Ohio State, when Penn State was up 10-0 with a chance to take that game by the throat, the Buckeyes come out, go right down and score to make it 10-7, thanks in large part to two communication snafus that left wide receivers wide open for big chunk plays. So I think cleaning up that communication as well is going to be something that I don't know outside of Penn State circles how much people really know how big of a problem that was at times this year on the defense. So again, I don't know how much will get talked about on like a national level, but I think getting that cleaned up is going to be a huge plus for the defense as well.
Last question out of me, Marty, would be on the other side of the football. So maybe Drew Aller is making comments or it's running through his mind what Aaron Rodgers, they used to say about him, thinking, are you ever going to draft me a wide receiver? So the two, arguably, correct me if I'm wrong, off the top of my head, the two best wide receivers, so you got Trey Wallace and you got Amari Evans, have hit the transfer portal. Kyron Hudson does come in from USC. So do you expect them to make any major moves there?
Yeah, I mean, they brought in Kyron Hudson, who, I mean, Matt, obviously you could talk to Hudson better than myself, but I feel like every time I watched the USC game, I just saw Hudson making plays, and I never quite understood, like whenever he transferred, I looked at his stats and like, this doesn't seem right to me. I don't know if it was misused by Lincoln Riley or if maybe it's just one of those guys where he made, didn't make a lot of plays, but the plays he made were such big flashy plays. They stick out in your mind. Like I know against Penn State, he had a heck of a game and everyone remembers the catch against LSU, but I think of him, and again, you know better than me, but I think you put him in an offense like this where he is your true number one wide receiver. I think that will, that alone will see an increase in the stats. And they also brought in Devontae Ross from Troy, who Devontae Ross to me is Amari Evans, but he can actually catch the ball. He doesn't drop 6 out of every 7 passes thrown his way. So we'll see what happens there. Tysier Denmark is a young kid they're very, very high on from Philadelphia. Will be a redshirt freshman in the fall. I expect him to play a big role as well. And, you mentioned if they're going to add anyone else, there's still the spring transfer portal window. I'm sure any receivers who hit the portal out of spring ball, Penn State is going to, vet them through and through. They would love to find a true wide receiver run in the portal, which I don't think is going to happen. But at the same time, I do think that a trio of Hudson, Ross, and Tysier Denmark can be better than what they had last year with Wallace and Evans, largely because the inability to get separation combined with drops was just such a killer from the two of them. I mean, you look at the interception at the end of the Orange Bowl. The defensive back essentially ran Amari Evans' route for him. Like it was not pretty. You go against Ohio State right before halftime. Igbinosa interception. It was a great play. That ball hit Trey Wallace right in the hands. That should have been a catch. Should have been a touchdown. Would have given Penn State the lead at the half, and who knows where that game goes then. So I think that trio will be better. But I also think, and part of this is because Andy Coulter-Nicky is so good at this, building offense around his playmakers. You've got Singleton back. You've got Allen back. Both of them are good pass catchers. They lose Tyler Warren, but the tight end room is still really good. You've got probably at least 4 guys in that tight end room still who are going to play on Sundays. So there's a ton of weapons there still. They'll find a way to make it work. And I think some of it too has to fall on Drew. He made a lot of strides from 2023 to 2024. You expect him to take another step, obviously. And again, you mentioned Aaron Rodgers, and I thought one thing Rodgers, when he was in his prime, was so good at was elevating his wide receiver room. And if you are a quarterback, the caliber that Drew Aller strides to be, and that he has the talent to be, you should be able to elevate your wide receiver room. So I think that, again, I think they'll be better because I like what they have more now. I also think getting that complete change of scenery helps, because I do think there were times Drew didn't trust his receivers because of how many times they struggled for separation. They struggled to get open. They dropped the ball, and it made him gun shy, however you want to put it, to throw the ball. So I think getting him a fresh group of receivers that he doesn't have these trust issues with can help a lot as well. And again, I think Hudson, I like him a lot. He's done it in the Big Ten. I think Ross can be a nice little slot speed type of guy. And Kaiser Denmark, that's a name for people to start to learn ahead of the Penn State season, because I think Denmark is going to have a big impact on this offense as a redshirt freshman this fall.